Okay, so I'm Chris Coleman with Tetra Tech. I'm the project manager for the new Central Transfer Station project. With me, we have our architectural group. We have Quentin Biaggi, who's our senior architect, and then Tricia Herden, who is with our architectural team, and she's the one that put together all these cool graphics that we're going to see. So I think the best way to convey kind of where we're at with the project is in two formats. One is a video, so I'm going to start and stop the video and talk on a couple points. And then we do have the VR goggles. Now, being sensitive to what's going on today, we do have Clorox wipes. If you don't want to put them on, that's completely understandable. We have a still video as basically we can show you the different screenshots. So I don't know if you've used the Facebook, you have the 3D photos that you see sometimes. We have that here. And so Tricia will walk through that. So if you didn't want to put the goggles on. Quick overview of what we're going to be talking about, as it gets a little confusing when you're in the video. I want to get you first spatially oriented. So this is the existing facility. This is 56th Street. North is to my left. We have East Dowling here on the right, and then that's Seward Highway up to the top of the screen. Okay, and so that's how we're oriented. And as we come through this, this is the entrance for the facility, and so the residents would come through. This is a combined HHW, household hazardous waste, and then a collection booth for customers to pay. As we come down here, you can see this is the new transfer station. In the front, we have the admin building. The transfer station is about 68,000 square feet. So, and the project consists of 8 buildings. And as you can see here, as we move around to the south side of the building, I want to point out some of the technology that we're utilizing. Here on the south side, we have thermal heat panels, which will help heat the water, domestic water in the summertime, but also in the wintertime, it will help heat the hydronic floor system to keep ice and everything off the floor, and also for the load out for the ramps. Now, safety is paramount, and one of the things that this transfer station does is it keeps the commercial activity separated from the residential. So on the west side of the site is where all our commercial activities are. On the east side of the site is where all the residential activities. Inside the building, too, unlike the current transfer station, it's all enclosed. And so this helps with sight, sounds, windborne debris. Here, this is where the collection vehicles come in. There's a booth there. This is the maintenance facility. We have 6 bays. And on the north side of the site, we have a warm storage facility that will store 20 collection vehicles, which is essential for the winter months. Now, this is a tour of the transfer trucks that go to the landfill. And so there's a tunnel underneath the floor, very similar to the current one. And there's 2 loadout slots here. And so when the garbage is tipped onto the floor, it's then pushed into the trucks. They're loaded, cleaned and prepped, and then they drive out to the landfill. We're also using that loadout tunnel to store 6 trucks in the wintertime, so that's another warm storage area. It's another view of HHW there. Now this is a view that most residents will see. Let me pause it right about here. And so right now this is, there's been, one of the reasons for the project is the long queuing lines. And so this is something that how we're addressing. We have 3 lanes of traffic, and then when you came into the entrance, there's 2 collection booths. And so queuing will be a lot faster with this particular setup here. And it is one way of traffic. This vehicle here is actually on the emergency access road. And so this is going into the transfer facility. Now in here, we have 18 residential slots. So the slots are oriented 45 degrees, so it's easier to back in. The lanes are wider, 2 feet wider than they currently are now. And so this is where customers would come in, back up, and then dump their trash over the wall. And this is another safety feature. And again, you're keeping the residents from the commercial vehicles. So now we're leaving the new transfer facility. We're going across the street, and we're going to talk about some of the conceptual plans that we have for the existing site. Now this is purely, it's in a schematic format, but this is the existing administration building that SWS currently resides in, and this is the maintenance building and warm storage. We've got the existing transfer station there. And so some of the thoughts that we have are putting a commercial baler here inside this facility for some of the bulk plastics and metals. The existing transfer station would be repurposed to take tires, wood, we'll put a shredder there, and also commercial organics. And it also gives residents a place to also put those same materials into that area. This is a new recycling canopy where customers can come bring plastics, paper, about 10 commodities for dropping that off. And it's covered with a canopy, which keeps the materials better quality. And then this is a new building that we're contemplating to accept commercial fiber. So newspaper, any kind of mixed paper where it be baled and then that's sold to buyers. And again, this is still at the conceptual planning stages for how we want to repurpose that. This is our current plan. So that concludes our video. Any questions before we dive into the world of virtual reality?
I have one if no one else. Mr. Welton.
So are you looking at just broad questions, or do you want to go through more and then we'll add some questions?
However you want to, whatever you want to ask.
So we've looked at what's next on your presentation.
Next is what we would do is the virtual reality where you would actually, kind of a similar path to what I did before, is we'll start at the entrance and you'll be immersed where you can actually look around and see the site. And you'll get a good look of 8 HHW, but what's more important is we're going to come inside the admin building. And one of the things that I failed to mention earlier is that within that administration building, we have an engineering on display. And what that does is that's an opportunity to educate the public on methods for diversion, good practices for recycling, and it also provides an area for the community. And so you can kind of see that better inside the goggles, and you can look down onto the
I'll wait, but what's HHW?
It's household hazardous waste.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, yeah. So it's your the paints and solvents and things that you can't throw in trash. Yeah.
No, go ahead. I'll wait.
Well, then,
Mr. Peterson.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. This might be too soon to ask. Just we have any idea how much more we might have to charge people to drop their garbage off if this plan goes forward?
We presented the long-range financial plan last year. I guess as far as the timing, you mean like when people come to drop off their garbage, what the residential rate is going to be, or like the commercial rate? When we open the facility, do we know that off the top of our head, Heidi?
Exactly what it will be?
Yeah.
No, we had proposed that for the next couple of years, 6.25% increase on disposal rates in order to accommodate the debt service. We plan to, as Mark said, update our long-range financial plan to make sure we're still on target with that.
We can get back to you with like a...
I thought it might be too soon. I just thought I'd throw it out there. Thanks.
So, if I might then, your maintenance facility that's listed, is that the replacement maintenance facility for the one that was destroyed in the earthquake, or is that a separate maintenance facility?
That's a separate one.
Okay, and the graphic that you used to show the residential recycling, I think it's that one over there maybe?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Underneath here, it didn't show. Is there kind of more detail on how that's supposed to operate? Because it looked like there were just parking spaces and no...
Yeah, the way that it's going to be oriented is there's actually a natural grade relief here. And so this is lower, this is higher. And the thought is that vehicles would come and they would drive up, back in, and then throw the garbage down into roll-off dumpsters. That'll be at a lower grade. So it'll be a guardrail. And then they would haul them out here to be, depending on what the commodities, either bundled here or bundled into the existing facility, or even taken here. So it's kind of a distribution point to these three buildings is how that would operate.
Any other questions? So I have a question to the body. Half of us are on the phone, half of us are here. There's the VR system set up. Do we want to do this now, or do we want to proceed into the next parts of the conversation?
How long would the VR course take?
It will take probably 10 minutes, Tricia. By the time it's probably going to take about 5 minutes to get it set up and cleaned and on, and then another, how long's the video? Almost 5 minutes, so about 10 minutes. And then we can also just walk through the stat. We can show it here if you wanted to skip the 5-minute part. We could just quickly go through if you wanted to see. If you were curious, I think the thing is the value they would bring is if you're curious to see inside the building. And I think that's where...
Yeah, I think that most of us here are really interested in the conversation about waste to energy. And while this is fun and interesting, since we don't have half the body here, I think it would be wise for us to proceed to the next step. And then maybe we don't own this equipment, and so this is your only opportunity should you want to see it. It might be possible when we get towards the end of the meeting for it to be done. We can have that conversation, but I think the wise course for us is to dive into the real red meat of the topic at hand.
Well, I have some questions on this.
Please, then, proceed,
Okay.
Mr. Wilton.
I mean, it's not new. I mean, one is you know, 6.5% a year. So I went by and dumped the sofa the other day. It was $17. So that's like the flat fee to go in and dump something. So you have a lot of competition in town. It's way cheaper. And I live in a location that has a dump, Independence Drive, and we get appliances and sofas and so on there. And as the prices go up, and you know, you're chasing inflation and you're 6.5%. Well, your competition's not, and we need to prepare somehow for pick up all the junk that's just dropped by the street, because that's what's going to be a lot. $17 to drop my mattress. For me, I don't care. But for a lot of people, that's not going to happen. You know, we'll have more and more on our streets. And as I look at this, I mean, it looks glorious. It looks very convenient. You get rid of the queuing. How often is the queuing an issue? Free dump week? Some Saturdays? You know, I mean, I guess the buzz phrase is value engineering, but make this sucker quarter less than you're charging now and don't raise your rates. Make it $10 to drop that mattress. I mean, that, you know, I mean, there are a lot of benefits here, but the side effect will be people, as we know, dumping stuff on the streets. And, $20 is a lot of money to a lot of people with that mattress. So that's not a question, that's a statement, I guess.
Right.
But I do have a question. So you're accommodating queuing lines. How often do those happen?
Pretty much every Saturday during the summer.
How long would the line be? I mean, like 20 people or 100?
Oh, I mean, we get over 1,000 customers a day on some Saturdays during the summer.
So what kind of thing? So if I'm waiting, am I like car 10 or 30?
I don't understand your question, John.
Well, if I'm lined up, how long is that queue?
Oh, it could be over an hour at times.
So it's over an hour. So that's
Yes.
30 cars maybe or something like that.
I'm not sure on the exact
Or I
number
guess
of
an hour,
cars.
maybe spend 5 minutes. That could be 12 cars in front of me. 5 minutes.
But I mean, I can talk to. There's Mark Corsentino here. I mean, what's been your experience with using the facility on a Saturday? How long have you had to wait?
At least 45 minutes, and it's 20 to 40 cars. Like how?
So you go every Saturday?
No. What I have gone on Saturdays, I don't go on Saturdays anymore.
Yeah, I will. I don't think because when I go, I just drive up. And
But
I'm
here's
there,
the truth:
you know.
the luxury. You can also go 8 in the morning. There's a line of cars cheap, because everyone's trying to get there before work. You know, there's certain times when people are working when they go there. You can go lunch. That's not a good time because you wait a long time. You go at 8 in the morning wherever it opens. That's not a good time either. So, that's my personal experience, not as any other constituent neighbors.
There's no waiting on Independence Drive.
What's Independence Drive?
That's right, but
No,
oh, they just toss it out of their truck.
Oh, I see what you're saying. You're talking about the illegal.
Yeah, it's so much cheaper.
Unless you get caught.
Right.
Yeah, nowadays everyone's got a phone, so they'll get shamed if you get caught.
Doesn't seem to work. So, and then I'm not sure do you have a reuse area? Was that pantry? So like
Yes.
people
Yeah,
drop
that's-
off
That
their
would be
stuff.
the very...
So that's part of the thing is a reuse area.
Right.
Did you
Like-
have that?
like we
I mean, is
chatted
that, like,
about.
how solid is that in your plan? Is this conceptual? Is it gonna work?
Well, no, this is at 35% right now, so it's worked into the design of the facility.
Okay, that's good, thanks.
Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess one follow-up question to what Mr. Weddleton said. Did you mean how can they be providing it cheaper? Did you mean that there's
Just
toxic?
dump it out of their truck onto the street.
Oh, okay.
And
Okay.
Independence Drive seems to be tons of it, because I pick stuff up, I brought mattresses in many
Okay.
times that I just pick up off.
Because one of the issues seems to be that there's a kind of expectation that throwing things out is free, and that people don't see all these other costs. And I think of like electronics, and I'm also fresh off the article that you shared with us in the National Geographic. But just when it comes to electronics, sometimes I wonder, okay, why isn't there just an upfront disposal fee when you buy a computer? Because of all the potential mingling of toxic materials, and that if it were properly disposed or reused, there's a cost associated with that. And I don't know where my question is in all this when we were going through the presentation about separating out stuff. There's still, I think, is that perception is, it's garbage, I just toss it. Why should that really cost anything? But obviously, there's a lot of, in terms of liabilities, in terms of maintenance, there are those. So, sorry, I don't know what my question is, except that I don't know how you help people to see that the 6.25 increase represents the real cost of getting rid of all this stuff that we don't. Is there a question there?
I don't know. I think you were referring to extended producer responsibility, whereas if there's kind of some kind of surcharge on
Just
a computer or something because you have to recycle it. And
maybe I'm thinking of just a mindset, change with that there's a real cost that many of us haven't truly felt to dumping so much stuff, because a lot of it is all together. And I don't know how many batteries are in your average, bag of family waste, or things that, produce that toxic, whatever it is, in the landfills that, if there was a breach or a failure, represent serious threats at a number of levels. So,
well, and there's no real way to police what people throw away, right? And that's why we have to do a good job of encouraging and giving people the opportunity, like we're going to be doing with this facility, to separate out those materials and give them an option to dispose of them properly, instead of just throwing them in your little cart, or I guess off Independence Drive. Have to go drive by there, go see that. It's just the first I've heard of it. So,
Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, aren't there materials in computers and electronics that are recyclable, that are valuable, that can be reused?
yeah, there's recyclers right now that do stuff like that. We don't do that as a service, obviously, but there are. I guess is that Total Reclaim,
Yeah,
Susanna?
Total Reclaim, yeah. It's a private company that does electronics recycling here in Anchorage.
We actually do take electronics out into the landfill, although we end up putting them
Right.
in Total Reclaim anyway. But yeah, so we do already have that service available.
Thank you.
Anything else? So, if I might, just briefly, let's talk about the costs again. Mr. Weddleton raised the question about the 6.5%, but I thought what we did with our costs over the last year and projecting into the next year or two was just equalize them with the cost increases that have naturally come. And so how should we think about these costs relative to this new capital investment, the debt service, and actually just paying for the actual waste removal?
I guess part of it was, if you remember, we were making up for a lack of rate increases for a very long time as far as disposal was concerned. So we were already kind of behind and trying to get caught up to what typical inflation would have been regardless. But then also we're stacking on the debt service that's going to be associated with constructing the new transfer station.
So it's a mix.
Yes.
Right.
And we'll talk about it too during the next presentation, but We're in the process of updating our long-range financial plan. That will include an update to what we're doing at the transfer station, as well as giving scenarios about, if we were to continue to look at waste to energy, what that would be in order to give the assembly, the information that you need to be able to make a decision about what you want us to do moving forward.
Right.
So we're in the process of doing that. I hope to have that done by, July or August, and have something, be sitting back here in the same meeting in front of you guys.
Okay, and similar to what I'm hearing about Independence Park, like mushrooms, mattresses grow in the spring, and it's amazing all the trash that lands in the streets, and there are at least 2 neighborhoods that do a very aggressive cleanup. One that is very, very aggressive. They get state grant funds, and even this year they may get a capital grant out of the state, which is kind of a miracle, Mountain View and Fairview. And so in some ways, this is a perennial problem. I don't know how much it is connected to the additional $2 or $3 at the landfill. I think it's just relative to values. Mr. Welton.
Can you make dumping mattresses free?
No,
Why not?
because there's still a cost associated with disposing of those.
Quick question.
So part of it is like, there's mattresses are kind of at the landfill because you can't compact them, right? Like, I think I've told you this story before, right? Like I was out there on the compactor, ran it over 5 times, and you can't make it compact at all. So basically what you need to do is you need to separate those out of the waste stream and shred them in order to get that material to actually, be able to compact and get it so it's not just taking up a bunch of space in the landfill. And so there's a cost that's associated with having, getting it out of the waste stream, with bringing it over to the shredder. There's costs associated with the shredder, operating the shredder, and then of course having to handle that material again to bring it out to the landfill.
So in a sensible business decision, you face costs and you don't do it, but you could legally do that. You just spread the cost of it. You bump up everything else.
I guess you could, but that's not typically how we want to do business.
Well, you don't, but you're looking just within your operations, but citywide, the mattresses are an issue, It's like, people dump them,
Right.
I complain about Independence, which is not as bad as, I'm sure other parts of town it's much worse, but, they don't fit in the dumpsters, they just get tossed to the side, and people are, so how do you solve that community problem?
I have an idea. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question because I know you want to move on. Are there any communities, and I am not suggesting we do this, that charge an upfront cost when you buy something for the disposal fee? Do you know?
I'm not sure a specific community. Susanna, do you know? Can you speak on that?
Like communities in Alaska that do that, or just anywhere?
No, I know in Europe it costs a lot to throw out stuff, and they have really small quantities of garbage. They incent behavior in other ways through fees and everything.
Yeah, so all over the country there are extended producer responsibility laws. They often come at the state level. Oregon and California have a lot. They're typically applied to things. Electronics is a big one. And so, yeah, those do exist. I can get you some resources on that if you're interested. The thing about Europe, Europe has a really, they start at their highest level of government, right, in terms of their extended producer responsibility laws and just the laws that they have for manufacturing and stuff like that. And so that's why you see really great recycle rates in Europe, right? Unfortunately, we don't have that here in America, but yeah, they're at the current status. There are a few bills actually kind of circulating in Congress right now about extended producer responsibility laws. They don't have a lot of traction at this point, but that's something that's being considered for sure.
Thanks.
Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So what about if the outlets that sold mattresses delivered would be required to pick up the old mattress and dispose of it properly? What about that idea?
I'm sorry, can you ask that again, Pete?
If a mattress store that's selling mattresses and then they many times deliver them, they'd be required to pick up the old mattress and dispose of it, properly. That might be something we could do. Is that something that other jurisdictions have in their laws or ordinances?
I'm not aware of anything like that. I do know that some places charge extra for mattresses because of the associated cost with the disposal of it, because there are additional challenges in disposing of mattresses as well.
Okay, thanks.
So it sounds like there are some theories of how we might approach the question of mattresses. We knew that's where this was going to go. One thought might also be to help create an organization or support an organization that's job is to pick up mattresses, right? That they are incentivized in some way to be that entity because it is a perennial problem. And for a lot of people who has a truck big enough to pick up a mattress and move it. And so it's something that might be worth contemplating who in the community, like Alpar or some of the organization, who might be able to work with some community groups to do that. Because I think we could actually distribute the need or the opportunity in some way to solve that problem without having to blanket make it so that people don't have to pay for the disposal of their mattresses. It's interesting. Anything left on this for now?
Unless you want to do the VR or do the video.
I thought we did the video. But we didn't do the video?
There is a VR video for those that don't want to put the goggles on. We can walk you through the different shots so you can see inside the building.
Let's move on. That's what I'm getting the sense of.
Come back to it at the
Can
end.
we post the video up on our website? Is it something that's prepared for that? Can we put it up on the committee website so then people can... What's that?
Sorry, I was suggesting a mattress bonfire, but I was joking.
Oh.
It was a Palmer thing.
Statehood celebration. Okay, then we are going to now move on to the item on our agenda that is germane and most important to all of us, I think. And Ms. Zalatel, did you pick up on the phone? No. Okay. So we are going to move into the waste to energy feasibility report, and for that, again, I'm going to defer to you, Mr. Spofford.
Okay.
And thank you, everybody, and I'm sorry we didn't get to the detail, but things are getting a little strange.
Okay, I'm Mark Spafford, General Manager, SWS. I have with me Mark Rogoff from Geosyntech Consultants, and we're going to present the results of the draft feasibility report. So basically, I'm going to talk about why we're looking at waste to energy right now. Mark will talk about the feasibility report, and then I'll talk about next steps. And of course, as always, feel free to answer or ask questions throughout the process as well. I know I probably sound like a broken record because every time I talk to you, I talk about this, but again, the landfill is, of course, the most important resource that we do have. I liken it similar to what AU has as far as Equipment Lake is concerned. And so it behooves us to start now when thinking about what we can do to preserve its life. And so part of it is, again, back to this clock. You can see at the top there, I took that, I think, the other day. We have 43 years of life remaining at the current status. If we do something like we're going to talk about today, waste to energy, you can see at the bottom the difference in the lifetime that it makes. Now, of course, that's if we did it today and switched everything over to that. If it takes another 10 years to implement it, that life is going to be even less that's going to be remaining. So that's why I think it behooves us to try to make a decision on this sooner rather than later.
Quick question,
Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as far as the timing, 43 years left, but if a WTE was implemented, it would be like 90%. It would handle 90% of the garbage, so you'd still need a landfill.
You'd still need a landfill for the ash.
And the ash. For
Right.
the 10% and the ash?
Well, that 10% is what's
the
remaining
ash.
after the, right. That's,
Okay.
so you have 100% of the garbage coming in, it gets burned in the process, and you're left with 10% of the ash from
Okay.
everything that went into it.
So then, as far as timing goes, I know that your recommendation would be now is the time, because the sooner you can do that, the more life you have left
Right.
in the landfill. So that's the timing issue. Okay.
Right.
Got it. Thank you.
And there's a couple other things that relate to timing as well that we'll get into here in a few minutes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And then why we're looking at this right now, one of the reasons is because we're following the plans that have been approved by the Assembly. One of those being our Integrated Solid Waste Master Plan. One of the recommendations out of that was evaluate different waste to energy technologies. That's why we've been sitting here talking to you about this today, as well as the Climate Action Plan. One of the main recommendations out of that was to look at different waste to energy technologies that could benefit the municipality to reduce greenhouse gas emissions as well as extend the life of the landfill. In addition to those two plans, And we don't like to spend the money on plans and then just let them sit on the shelf. So it helps if we're trying to implement the recommendations out of it, and that's why we're here. But not only that, I also have Mr. Corsentino with Anchorage Water and Wastewater Utility knocking on my door because he has an incinerator problem. And one thing we know that we can do, and several jurisdictions have already done this, we know that in a waste to energy process, biosolids that are produced from a wastewater treatment plant process can be processed in a waste to energy process. And I guess, Mark, you can speak to that if you want a little bit more.
Oh, you got it. But the only other thing I'd add to speak to Suzanne's point, timing, there's a window of opportunity here. Let's put it that way. We need to do something with our incinerator within the next few years. And one important point on this project and either ours, if we said yes today, we're going to go forward with this, it's still a 5 to 10 year process before anything's finally complete. So it's a long process because there's permits, there's financing, there's getting all the documents put together, public, there's all kinds of things that have to get done ahead of this. We have our own issue alone. For us, when you look at the cost, we can see the number, $100 million for us to do up to maybe 100 tons per day. For another $300 million, which is four times the cost further, you can get almost 15 times the volume of waste streams. In other words, he's looking at over 1,000 tons per day. I'm lucky if I'm at 100 tons per day now with my existing incinerator. He's going up to 1,000 plus, which is over 10 times more capacity for only 4 times the cost. Not 10 or 15 times the cost, 4 times the cost. There's an economy of scale here. And he's going to talk about it later, but since I'm here talking right now, the only other thing that's really pressing us right now is this whole issue of PFAS, polyfluoroalkyl substances. Sorry, I twist your tongue to speak that stuff. But those are the dangerous classic compounds that are here. It's in Congress, it's in DEC, everyone's trying to figure out what you do with this stuff. And the point being is I don't want to spend $100 million on a solution, because there's several things we could do to manage our biosolids. But they all have a risk that there's a legacy pollutant in there that is not taken care of by most of the things we're looking at doing will not address the PFAS issue, which is future regulations coming down the road. It's a public health issue. So mass burn, incineration, whatever you want to call it, high temperature destruction, thermal destruction is a way to take care of that problem. It's still a work in progress, but that's one of the key criteria for me is no matter what I do, I have to look ahead. I've got to take what Fred calls the long view and say, I've got to solve this future pending problem with regulatory requirements and a public health and safety issue. And this is one of the mechanisms, the very sound and true mechanism that can work. And there's an economy of scale, so there's the window of opportunity. It's now.
Thank you. So I have Mr. Dunbar in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I have a question on this AWU issue. Mr. Corsentino, could you say a little bit more specifically when exactly you need to have this incinerator issue resolved by? And also, could you describe how payment and the rate structure would work? Is there any challenge with, essentially, I read this to say that AWU would essentially pay for a portion of the construction that SWS would put forward. Is that correct?
We would upfront some potential. To answer that question, I don't know the exact mechanism yet. We would share in that cost for us, but we'd also get we'd have to actually get a benefit back. Our ratepayers, as an economically regulated utility, that would be highly scrutinized and looked after. So that plan has not been formulated yet because we first need to see if we're going to go forward on this. We want to go through this process and see if it's feasible, get the cost. Then we'd have to work out a memorandum of agreement that would have to be thoroughly vetted and looked at by a lot of different stakeholders. But short answer is yes, we could potentially forward front a big portion of this cash. But again, we have to borrow the money too. No matter what, we're borrowing this type of money.
And could you say again, what's the exact timing on when you need to have your incinerator replaced and why?
First and foremost, we've been working on our alternatives for the last several years already. This has been a looming issue for us. We're beyond the really useful life of our existing facility, so we continue to have to spend millions of dollars to reinvest in. I'm looking in the next couple of years because of new regulatory requirements to spend another couple $1 million on my existing incinerator. I would like to tell the EPA we have a plan, an alternative plan, instead of spending another $5 million in the next few years, saying I'd rather put that money to a future plan that gets us out of this business altogether. So the short answer is we're beyond our useful life. In order to keep it running, we'll have to continue to invest millions of dollars over the next several years. We have a contingency plan. If it fails tomorrow, which it very well could, catastrophically, we would be trucking all the stuff to the landfill in perpetuity, and that would be a huge, that would be a cost increase to our ratepayers because of those trucking costs. It's feasible and it can be done, but there's problems with that. It's also a safety issue of driving more trucks on the road. It's not feasible, it's not a long-term solution.
Anything
Thank
further?
you, Mr. Chair.
All right.
Okay. And another part of that is I think it's synergy between the two utilities because in my experience, the public expects us to work together, especially and not be siloed up in departments. So I think that's another a good point of this project and us teaming on that part of it. But also, Alaska has other garbage problems too as a state in general. So Matsu, I've got Butch Shapiro's here today from Matsu. He's my counterpart from there. Who's they're currently looking at a waste to energy process as well. And so when you start thinking about it like that, does it make sense for two different localities to be looking at the same type of process for processing their solid waste, or is there some kind of synergy or economies of scale? And in fact, I think we met with the combined Matsu and Assembly. That was middle of last year, and there was I think a lot of interest from your counterparts there of looking into this together. So that's kind of like what we did for the pre-feasibility study. I've talked with my counterpart in Kenai. They want to get out of the landfill business. The Denali Borough was interested. I even went so far as to chat with some contacts that I've had in Southeast Alaska on Prince of Wales Island, whereas they currently spend upwards of $150 a ton to barge out all of their solid waste and recycling to mills in Seattle as well as a super landfill in Oregon. And so if we had a solution here statewide that was cheaper than what it cost them to sail their garbage down to Oregon, they would be interested in something like that. So basically what I'm getting at is it's the more economies of scale that we can, the more garbage that we can throw at a project like this, the better the economies of scale, the overall lower cost it's going to be. As well as in the case of shipping out garbage to Oregon or whatever, you're keeping those jobs in Alaska, which I think is another selling point. And one thing that I did forget to mention is that this project isn't an energy production project. This is a landfill extension project. So it's basically adding capacity and life to the landfill. It's not an energy production project. That's a beneficial side benefit. And then when we were meeting with everyone, with most of the assembly members this week one-on-one, a question was brought up, well, that's great that these plants are functioning in Florida. That's all well and good that you went on a trip to go see those, but are there any others that are functioning in kind of a subarctic environment similar to Anchorage, Alaska? And as you can see, there's numerous examples. These are just a few that we pulled off the internet really quickly this week. Just wanted to illustrate that this isn't just this is something that works in a subarctic environment.
Mr. Welton?
So we could plop this thing down right in the middle of Anchorage, or we could team up with Matsu and plop it down right in the middle of somewhere just north of town.
Right.
I don't know, that might be okay. Have you been talking about that? Split the cost? I mean, maybe you do 3/4 and they do 1/4, but it's not in the middle of our city.
Yeah, I've talked to them about that, but however, it's just it's not mature enough on their end. Because they're still in that RFP process.
Isn't there someone here?
Yeah, there's Butch. Could you speak to that, Butch?
If you don't mind, if you're going to speak, come forward so the microphone can hear you. It's up here. Just come forward. And please state your name for the record.
So, I think you hit it on the head, Mark. There's really not. We're right in the middle of a waste energy process right now. There's an RFP out of the street, and so we're waiting to get back, and that's going to be out there marinating until May. So until then, we really can't make any real movements forward with this. But it has been presented to the borough manager, and they have said it might be interesting to look at this. So I think kudos to Mark for looking at it from the big perspective. Is really a big South Central kind of a project. I think is, and you folks have a real lot of ability to move this forward. And I think it would be something definitely worth looking at.
So we don't need a plant 1 and a plant 2 and a plant 2A. Right?
Yeah.
So
I don't
can
think
you
so.
say your name for the record?
Butch Shapiro is my name.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Mr. Welton had a question.
So you're a year and a half behind us. You could catch up because they've done a lot of work since that
Right.
So you could grab that. I mean, kind of the economic feasibility's done. Okay, if it worked here, it would work somewhere, with the big interchange there to Palmer and Wasilla.
Absolutely.
Just drop it there, and you guys could have this great business. You wouldn't have this stack here at the there, but that would be out there, not your neighborhood. Is that? Do you think that would be acceptable?
I think from my perspective it would be, but I don't have the, the horsepower to say yea or nay, of course, but I think that's something that would be considered for sure.
So, kind of follow up on that. So you're pursuing this in a way. You have an RFP out there for a company, perhaps the same one, to say, is this feasible? And get what it would cost and where it would go and so on.
Right.
You're pursuing that as we're a little bit ahead of you. Where would you say we'd cancel this and just use anchorages?
Well, I think that someone could even respond to our RFP and say, we see Anchorage is looking at something like this, and kind of go down that road as well. So I do think it's something that would be worth considering, and I think that from my perspective, interfacing with our assembly, I think they're open to just about anything that makes sense and will save us money. So.
All right, thank you.
Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this may be coming up in a slide here, but I wanted to ask about formalizing the synergy, and since Mr. Weddleton, raised the point, and so you don't have to answer now, but I would want to know, what is the probability of other communities paying in? How does that impact the financing model? And what formal structures exist so that we can share that cost? I don't need an answer now, and I assume it's part of that conversation. Okay, thanks.
So just on to Mr. Weldon's point, if there's no other questions, I put myself in the queue. We have an issue, though, that is different than the Matsu, right? That the majority of our waste production is here. And if we're going to be moving waste to be consumed as in a waste energy plant 40 miles or 35 or 45 miles, then that creates a whole other set of circumstances. Have you contemplated what that might look like?
Not yet, no.
Okay.
Nope.
Yeah, I just can imagine there's trucking all of that similar waste and solids and everything else. It just compounds the problems that we're trying to resolve as opposed to fix them. Whereas if you have a small producer of waste, relatively speaking, it would be more cost effective for them to bring theirs to us than us to ship all of Anchorage's solid waste.
I think we've got like 55 trucks. I think we talked, yeah,
Yes.
right? And then there was 10 or something, right? It's equivalent from what it would be coming from the valley.
Mr. Welton.
And just on there, these aren't in the middle of neighborhoods, in the middle of cities. And ours would be right in the heart of our
That's
city.
not necessarily, because that's just one of the potential sites that it could potentially be.
But we're kind of heading that way.
No, we're not. We just haven't gone through that process yet to look at what the best site is. I mean, it's just it's a potential, but it's not like where it's going to be.
I would note for the record, Mr. Dyson popped in and then vanished. He's around here somewhere. And my thought is that we have two equally important sites to look at. One is at the regional landfill, where all that infrastructure already is at, and one is where all these other conversations are happening. And so this solution can happen out there, especially if we have a partnership with the military and come up with a work plan. But these are the things we'd sort out in the future.
Yeah, I mean, it's like we're at 1%, right, of thinking about this. It's nowhere near, where we're at the point where we're going to do a site selection or anything, or like that. It's going to be at the landfill, or it's going to be at the central transfer station. It's nowhere near that.
Chris?
Mr. Rivera?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And not to belabor this point, but I've seen pictures of some of these where they're right next to playgrounds and neighborhoods. So these are sometimes in the middle of cities. They're right next to where our children play, right? So they're done in all kinds of different ways. So I don't think I agree with the chair. I don't think we need to sort of belabor on that specific point quite yet.
But children do love playing with three-tailed lizards.
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Dyson.
Folks back there are having trouble hearing. I encourage all of you to speak up.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Spofford.
Okay, I'll turn it over to Dr. Rogoff.
Good morning. Mark Rogoff, Senior Consultant with Geocentech and the author of that big report that you all read. What I'm going to try to do for the next 15 minutes or so, I hope we have enough time.
We have another hour.
Oh, we have another
Wait,
hour?
no, we have till 1, right? We have
Oh,
another hour.
okay. I was like worried. But
No, we set ourselves up for success this time.
Great, great. So we have enough to ask questions. Okay. So what I'm going to try to do is go through the report, kind of give you a Cliff Notes version of the major findings of the report. One of the things that we did do is put a budget together for an estimated cost to implement a waste-to-energy project. We made an assumption that if the Assembly made a decision on, let's say, day one, how much time would it take to the most expeditious route to move forward. And so that we prepared a pretty intense schedule that had about 11 major tasks, about 80 subtasks, and there's probably hundreds of sub-tasks, all these individual things. So it's a pretty complex project. So just to reiterate where we have gone on our trip so far. Back in September, we presented a pre-feasibility report, and we presented to this board. That's kind of like on the 30,000 foot level, maybe 20 to 30,000 foot level. Is it reasonable for the community to actually go forward with a waste-to-energy project? We started on phase 2, which is the feasibility report, and we started off by having stakeholder meetings. We met with pretty much all the department heads within the city, and we met with the regulatory agencies. We had in-depth conversations with ADEC on the permitting of the facility. Mark and I took a tour of 5 waste-to-energy plants in Florida. And you might ask, why Florida? Well, it was easier to get into the plants. Many of these are my former clients, and a few are in my neighborhood, in the sense. So it was really easy to get to. And it was also easy to set up the meetings with some of the municipal managers. So Mark got the benefit of, if you had to do this again, what would you do differently? So I think that was extremely valuable, I think, over the long term if you do implement the project. We had a number of responses to or questions that the assembly members had come up with. We came up with I call it a fact sheet, to try to summarize it, get it down to a couple of pages, and try to answer some specific questions, at least what we know right now. And then we started on the development of the feasibility report. So just to reiterate a little bit about the tours, we did five waste-to-energy plants, mainly around Tampa. Tampa is, I call it the mecca of waste-to-energy in the United States, and there's a lot of reasons for that, primarily because of the difficulties of siting landfills, and then counties that had landfills wound up having Superfund sites. So the public really wanted to get out of the landfilling business, and they impart that message to municipal managers, county managers to move to waste to energy. The state of Florida, also encouraged all of the major metropolitan areas of the state to go to waste to energy. So there was an impetus on the regulatory side to kind of move away from waste to energy, away from landfilling, more to waste to energy. So that was a big issue. All of these plants, all of the 5 plants, and there's a summary I think it's in chapter 2 or chapter 3 of the report, are what they call public-private partnerships. They're all essentially owned by the public, they're owned, financed by the public, but they're operated by private companies that have the experience to run these fairly complex, I'll call them power plants, but you wouldn't build one of these things as a power plant because they're pretty expensive just to produce the power. The main thing, as Mark mentioned, is to extend the life of the landfills. And if you have a major metropolitan area where it's very difficult to site landfills, anything you could do to extend the life of the landfill forever is a real benefit. Otherwise, you have to transport hundreds and hundreds of miles away. The longevity of these plants, there was a lot of questions, is this just something that just happens and 10 years down the road, the plant closes? All of these plants have longevity of well over 30 years. The Pinellas County project, which is in St. Petersburg on the Gulf Coast, went online in 1984. And so they have just now gone through a refurbishment of that plant, and the county's invested another $150 million, hopefully getting that plant to last another 30 more years. So they've fully engaged in waste to energy. We did look at all of the emissions that all these plants have to provide reports to the state on their air emissions. There's a mountain of data going back 30 years of all the requirements. The EPA has established in 1990 Clean Air Act amendments. There was a series of regulations that came out that regulated these type of facilities, and they're pretty stringent. They're maybe not as stringent as the European Union, but they're pretty close. And then when we looked at all of the data, if you really look at it in the report, some of them are just, their emissions, their actual emissions are literally only 20%, 20 to 40% of the regulatory requirement. So they're well under the regulatory requirements, so they're doing pretty well. The thing that's different from waste-to-energy plants than landfills, waste-to-energy are highly regulated. All the operators in the plant are certified by both the state and by EPA, and they have to meet all those regulations. All the data that's collected is collected on an hourly basis. They have emission control devices on the plant. That's all reported to the state and EPA. All that data is available to the public. It's online. If you're interested to find out how's your plant doing, it's all online. We had a comment about compatibility with nearby land uses. These plants are all over the place. Some of them are out in the middle of nowhere, and there's probably reasons why. A lot of them, I would say a majority of them are located in urban areas, and they're really compatible with nearby land uses. That picture to the right, that's the Lee County waste energy plant in the background, and we went around, the operator said, you have to go to the park that's nearby. And so we went around literally in the back end of the plant, really on the property line. That's a picture from the kiddie park that's located adjacent to the waste energy plant. Their major Little League fields are located adjacent. That's a county park. It's been there. It was done after the plant was constructed. So there's a lot of examples of dealing with compatibility.
Just quickly, Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So on the public-private partnership piece, does that refer to on the operations side, like for example, publicly owned and privately run, or what might that look like for us here?
So these plants, because they were fairly complicated, looking back in 20, 30 years ago, the goal was to, because they were complicated, to have a private operator to design, build, and operate it over the long term. So if he's giving you a construction price, he has to live with that because he's going to operate it for the next 20 years. He's putting together a price for the operations of that facility. So he's got to take into account the maintenance of the facility, the labor, all the costs of the air pollution control equipment, all of the equipment and things like that over the long term. And it's worked out pretty well because basically as an owner, you know what your price is over an extended period of time. So if you're doing a rate study, you can predict what your management fee is going to be over the long term. And usually there's a CPI adjustment, but that's all contractual.
Okay, so it refers to that operations piece, not so much the construction piece. That it would be
Well, it's a total package.
total package.
You go on with an RFP that says design, my plant,
Sure.
construct it, and operate it for 20 years. That doesn't mean it's 20 years. You could go out for 30 years. It's just that the state of the industry up until recently has been 20-year contracts.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, I mean, that's still open here. I mean, that hasn't been assumed.
Right.
But just looking for ways in which the cost could be spread out over more stakeholders.
Well, and
potentially.
we've already started investigating that because, especially when you think about it as like a statewide solution, that's when you get folks like we've already met with the Denali Commission. We've had initial talks with Alaska Energy Authority. And there's Office of Indian Energy. There's a whole bunch of different entities out there that have interest in looking at something and evaluating something like this on a statewide level. And so we've already started those initial conversations because obviously the capital cost is so much. We want to try to do as much as we can to distribute that. Not just have the whole burden fall on the municipality for whatever reason. And then obviously bringing in more partners is always a better solution as well, and a better story to tell. Especially when you start looking at, is there any way to get federal funding for something like this or that type of thing. So.
Great. If I might, to be clear, the costs of these operations aren't borne by the municipality per se, they're borne by the ratepayers, right? I mean, we have a very clear, distinct line between our enterprises and utilities and the municipal taxpayer. And so while it might seem like a slicing of a hair pretty thinly, there is a difference.
So in the report, as I mentioned, we had 11 different major tasks, and I'll talk about
Mr. Chair?
Is that Mr. Dunbar?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I asked to be put in the queue on this question.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I just want to follow up on what Ms. LaFrance was talking about with the private-public partnership. And, there was a lot of enthusiasm about that back when I was studying economics in the early 2000s. But I think there's been a lot of examples around the country of where essentially what you've done is privatize profits, if any, and then socialized risk. And I want to hear from Mark, either of the Marks, how you structure this in such a way that, for example, if Alaska and Anchorage has a significant economic constriction and, Covanta can no longer turn a profit, but we're still holding the bag in terms of the actual cost of the capital, right? I mean, we're the ones that carry the debt, not them. So how do you, if there's a major contraction, how do you protect the municipality from basically socializing the risk of holding that debt?
Ron, do you want to step in?
Yeah.
Ron Hatt's here too.
I wanted to step in and just state that when one of the major issues we're going to have is what model are we going to use? And that's where we're going to end up depending on consultants such as Dr. Rogoff to help us define what type of DBO model are we going to use to where we don't do the things that Mr. Dunbar is talking about, or that if we do those things, we're conscious about what we've done. So as Mark said, we're still in the 1% phase of trying to decide, are we going to do this? And if we do it, then we move on to what model we'll use. I hope that Forrest answers some of your questions and alleviates some of your concerns.
Well, just to follow up really quickly, I mean, we're talking about Covanta taking up the cost of operating, and that's all well and good, but ultimately we own this thing, right? And so, especially if Covanta says, well, we can't really operate this anymore, what if they declare bankruptcy? I mean, what are we on the hook for?
So, if I might, has this been delved into in this presentation?
As far as deciding whether or not...
What types of models might work in terms of public-private partnerships, risk and benefits. So if I might ask us then to put that onto the dashboard for our next conversation so that we can have a reasonable investigation and a presentation of options. Spitballing is probably high risk, and not very valuable. And so thank you for raising an important question. And the question is, what models work and how do we minimize the risk to the ratepayer and the municipality in the process of going into a public-private partnership should we decide to go that path? Can you bring us that answer later?
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So 11 different tasks, many subtasks, many sub-subtasks. And Mark, we didn't bring the big Microsoft project schedule, but a lot of these are critical path items that need to be done. Some of them have obviously links to each other that you have to do one before the other, and I'll kind of talk about that as we go along. Okay. So the key in really the successful waste energy project is public engagement. All of these projects that we visited and all the other ones that are around the United States have had an active public engagement process. It's important at the beginning, and that's why I showed in the schedule to define and create a meaningful program that you can engage the public. There's a lot of items which require citing, and the public needs to be involved, that they recognize and they're part of that process to decide whether or not site A or site B or site C makes the most sense. The worst thing in the world that you can do is basically do a stealth project and not tell the public, and pick a site, have the board pick a site, and no one is really involved in it. So the key in here is develop a meaningful program. Most of the projects they've used internal resources, but they have used a public relations or a public engagement consultant that can help assist in that kind of meaningful engagement with the public. And what might work in Indianapolis or Spokane may not work here. And so whoever would get selected and whoever is going to be working on this has to be involved in actually developing a program site-specific for Anchorage to understand how this citizenry works and how they need to be involved in the process. I don't know to say anymore. It's, for the most part, it's part of all the project efforts that you go on. And if you assume that this is a 3-year process, a 3 or 3.5 year process, this process goes through every one of these tasks. It's really, really important. So again, it's kind of like a critical path item. This is another critical path item. All of the projects that I know of, and I started in 1981 as a project manager for a county government. At 29, they gave me a $160 million project and said, go for it. And so the key thing was to develop a project team to identify that person, other than Mark, that's actually going to be the project manager for this particular thing. Day-to-day involved with the consultants, and also out there to help in the public engagement process. So I had the benefit of looking back 40 years of looking at records and saying, well, what did I do over that 3-year process of it? I did over 150 presentations. I did in the old days. We didn't have things like this. We had slideshows. You walked around with this slide deck, and you walked around. I don't know how many times I had presentations at public town halls, professional associations, chambers of commerce, you name it, citizens groups. It's just meant, and when you think about it, if you did 150 and you had 30 people or 40 people at those meetings, we probably got most of the people in the county at that stage that really knew about the project, because the media was involved. A lot of those sessions were televised. They were on radio. There was a story. I actually went back in the records from 40 years ago and looked at all the scrapbooks that I had. And we had hundreds of stories that were in the local newspaper and all the community associations. So literally nobody could say that they didn't know that this project was done, and people didn't have their say. So it's really important that if this project moves forward, Mark, hires a program manager. Okay, waste composition. That's another critical path, really. And it really, since this plant is combusting municipal solid waste, you really have to know your fuel source. And you need to know the BTU value, though. You need to know how many kilowatt hours would be generated by the fuel that's generated in Anchorage. There's a lot of data out there. There's hundreds and hundreds of waste composition studies gone through the United States, but that's not specific to Anchorage. And if you're designing a project for Anchorage, you really need to know what's in the waste. And secondly, it's important if you're really doing a recycling program to really know what's in your waste stream. How much of your waste stream is potentially recyclable?
Mr. Walton?
So, talking about, I assume this is hypothetical.
That is from Skagway.
Okay. Because my understanding from our plastic bag ban thing, we only had like 6% or something as plastic. Is that, am I totally wrong?
Of our waste stream is plastic?
Yeah, when you did tests of what was in there.
Susanna, can you talk to that?
Yeah, so in 2017, we actually did conduct a very small waste stream analysis out of the Anchorage Regional Landfill, which gave us basically like a snapshot of what we think is in the landfill. And then, of course, we cross-referenced that with national data and came up with an estimate. So we haven't, but this is talking about doing a very comprehensive waste stream analysis.
What 6% about right?
I think it's 5% for like non-recyclable plastic. So yeah, this would dive into it on a much more small
I
level.
don't understand that. But the order of magnitude is quite large because this is 18% Skagway. So
That was Susanna Kelbo for the record. And anything further?
So then waste composition. So of course poison's coming out of the stack, and then the PFAS is kind of a new one. And does that break down in the heat? Is that what we're getting to?
It mineralizes it. It will break those bonds and it mineralizes it in the thermal combustion process.
With like mercury and stuff like that. Isn't that like an element?
But it's Mark. Did you want to speak to that? I mean, it turns into it's fluoride and.
Well, yeah. So this is Mark from me. Without getting too much into the weeds, yes, it does break it down. Carbon, there's synthetic organic compounds that are broken down by thermal destruction to break those bonds. But as far as other elements, metals, mercury, that stuff, that's what the existing stacks are for. Those are removed through other processes. They are removed via other processes in the stack. That's the whole purpose of them. There are emission standards for those things. That's not unique to all kinds of air stack emissions. That's a pollution control mitigation measures that are in place.
And that actually raises a question. I had put myself in the queue. I'll get to you in just a moment, Mr. Dyson. I'm assuming we haven't done this yet, but in the future, can you also prepare for us kind of an analysis of the regulatory schemes that we will be required to go through, including EPA, state DEC?
It's in the report.
Oh, yeah, okay, so it is in there? I didn't get to that part yet, so, okay. Thank you. Then I'll read that more closely because I think that will either give us comfort or not, depending on what the answer is. So, Mr. Dyson.
Yeah, thank you. There's two things about this project, two or three that I think are pretty exciting. But one of them is driving it, at least according to it. Our leadership is our inability for us to handle sludge from the wastewater treatment plant. And I think that crisis might be a little overstated, but it's not in the long haul. And so will that be considered in the fuel source and, the BTU value of that? The other thing about this that has been intriguing is the possibility that our landfill will be utilized by other cities around and so on. So could be a huge advantage to have them participating and in helping us and so on and so forth. But it also would mean that we would need to at least have a back of the envelope accuracy on the heating value of the fuels that they will provide. So does the concept of these other cities participating with us show up in the study that we're about to
Yes.
approve?
Yes.
All right, and then, Mark, perhaps in another conversation, one of the reasons for us to do this sooner rather than later is to help them in their long-term plans.
Correct.
And so our, quote, sludge crisis, adds impetus to our doing this. But it would be interesting to know what the plans of these other cities are and where their timeline is. Because if we can help them avert a crisis they have, then that makes this all the more valid. So your nodding is telling me that those factors are going to be considered in the thing that we have before us.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yes.
You have built a little credibility with the last time, because everything I asked about, you said we got it covered, and it's going to happen. And I hope you're right. My skepticism is ill-founded. Thank you.
Thank you. And so we've heard a couple of times that we're at about the 1% level of the conversation, and I assume at some point, do you have a sense of when we will have a regional analysis where all the players are in their timelines and interest?
Next slide.
Okay.
Okay, we call it waste flow negotiations. So right now, the mini generates roughly 1,000 tons per day. And so when we did the pre-feasibility study, we looked at the economics of 1,000 tons per day or 1,200 tons per day, another couple of hundred tons from the 2 other boroughs. I have no clue of how much tonnage really is generated in Southeast Alaska. I have a pretty good idea because I did work for both Juneau and Skagway, and all those communities are, shipping their waste to the Roosevelt landfill in Oregon. There's probably another 100 tons out there, maybe a little bit more. They're paying an outrageous amount of money to ship that waste, off island to Oregon. So it impacts to know what the size is, to know how much tonnage that would be part of this plant. It's really important in this kind of phase or this task to know if the other municipalities and the other boroughs would participate in there and how long. So that you size the plant to accommodate that. Typically, at all the projects that I've done, there have been multiple cities that are part of county projects, and they'll sign an interlocal agreement for 20 years, so the length of the bonds for the facility. So that up front that they'll bring that waste, hook or by crook, and if they don't, they have to pay a penalty for that, because you've sized your plant to accommodate that flow. So it's really important to get that economies of scale. The waste shed study is what we've been talking about. It's really going out and looking at the tonnages from some of the other communities and perhaps survey them and see how interested they are. Some of these communities already have long-term agreements with Republic, which is a major waste hauler, to combine their waste and then put it on a barge and set it down to Southeast Alaska. I have no idea how long those contracts and when they could get out of those contracts. They would want to know on their side. They want to know how soon Anchorage would go forward on that, because they could make changes to those contracts. They can make those short-term versus long-term. In the report, in the appendices, which you didn't get, which I think Mark has a copy, there are standard agreements in there. So, and I did pick a couple of agreements from the city of Spokane. Spokane runs a waste-to-energy plant, which is about 800 tons per day. It's a city-county project, but there's also other cities within the county that participate in the operation of the waste-to-energy plant, and they have signed long-term agreements. So there's some examples. The projects in Florida have multiple cities that are part of it. The one for Pinellas County has 23 cities that are part of a county project, and they have committed their waste for the length of the project. So they have committed that. Energy contract negotiations. It's really important, since yes, its primary purpose is to increase the life of the landfill. for volume reduction, but it's also the energy provides pretty much about 50% of the revenues from the waste to energy plant. The other balance is tipping fees or customer fees or things of that nature. So it's really important to enter into some sort of long-term agreement with a purchaser of the power. We have talked to Chuach, and they are interested. It's part of their long-term planning process to try to get more renewable power to balance their portfolio, and they are interested. I think we could, if we went forward on this project, I think within 30 days, and that's the number that they gave, they could come up with a memo of understanding between the Mooney and the electric utility. So you have potentially a willing buyer. The real question is what kind of contract would be established, and they brought up the idea of, well, do you want to commit to a certain number of megawatts from the plant that you have to provide hooker by crook? We'll depend on that. We'll give you a higher price for the power, or will you go to some sort of variable pricing depending on our avoided costs? That's something that would have to be evaluated as we move forward on that, and evaluated by a consultant that is knowledgeable about the industry and the agreements that would be developed.
And then I'm looking at Anna. I thank you, Anna, for being here. So can you add anything to that, or?
I think you did a good job. Excuse me, providing an overview of the process and where you guys are heading. If there's specific questions, I'm happy to help answer those, but I think Mark covered it.
That's Anna Henderson, MLMP. Mr. Dyson.
Yeah, thank you. So, cook inlet gas is literally stranded gas, virtually no export market, which drives the price down. There's no other, and so on and so forth. So back 15 years ago, it was $7 an MCF, and now their world price is bumping around a little over $2. Pardon?
1.2.
So you're making my point. And so how in the world can this plant sell power that's anywhere near what it is from natural gas?
Can you help out with that, Anna?
Well, I think your questions to the economics of what type of generation projects are viable and
Economic, yes.
I guess I don't know the specifics about the technology, and I have not seen estimates of what the cost to produce a kilowatt are, but as long as, Mark made a good point earlier, and this is a waste management project and not an energy production facility.
Precisely.
So you get a byproduct that you can maximize your economic benefit from and offset your cost. I think that's the goal.
Right, yes. So you're making my point. We, in my opinion, should not be selling this based upon the cheap power we're going to get from it when we have this underutilized, almost limitless resource at our doorstep. So I just caution you who will be here to pay attention to that. The economic justification isn't based on the retail value of power. Plus, we have an absolute surplus of gas-fired plants in Anchorage now, and however optimistic you want to be about this community's growth, it ain't happening in the short term. Hopefully it will in the long term. So soaking up our reserve capacity is going to be a long time. That's going to be decades. And I don't see the fuel prices changing. So just encourage you all to beware of this thing being sold on the economic value of power generation.
Thanks, and I think the primary value is we have a very huge surplus of waste and a limit of land.
Absolutely.
And time
Absolutely.
is the value we gain from this project in extreme amounts. That's, to me, the highest point of value.
Well, and the other one is, question 4, it's all, the value of extending the life of the landfill is huge for anybody that wants to look long term. Can you imagine you guys going out and looking for a site that big at today's land prices? All right, sorry, excuse me for preaching, but what I just said, particularly on the energy side, is really valuable information.
Okay, next one.
Yeah. Siting analysis. We talked a little. There was at least a question on the issue of the site. It's obviously it's really important. This is all another critical path item. Without the site, you're not really going to know how to permit the facility, how to start the permitting process. So typically on most of these projects, it's a very involved process to compare the feasibility of the sites. I just threw a few up on the wall there. It obviously could be the landfill. It could be the transfer station. It could be the wastewater treatment plant. It could be the South Central Power Plant site, which the electric utility suggested. It could be others. But no matter how many there are, you have to go through an analysis to look at not only the environmental aspects of that, how to permit, what's on that site, but also the economics, to look at the economics of that, and also the social issues dealing with that. And typically going through a very detailed analysis to look at are there any fatal flaws in that analysis. So that's kind of the analysis off to the right, preliminary screening, evaluating and selecting the candidate site, and then evaluating. And the public needs to be involved in that. Right? All those, the criteria that you come up with evaluating all the feasible sites has to be part of the process, public engagement.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Dyson.
I hope that you look at the transportation links, where you cite this and where the trucks are going to run and so on. But you've got something nearly magic. That's the railroad tracks, run all the way from Seward through Mat-Su. And Alaska Railroad is hurting for money. They'd be delighted to have a regular customer whose checks don't bounce.
Right.
And it's a daily run. I mean, it could be just ideal for hauling both ways. And the railroad couldn't be closer.
Right.
If you use the landfill site. All right.
Yep, but we've definitely looked at that, and that's one of the options that are on the table is railing it to a facility like that, shipping it via railway.
Can you rent or lease the cars?
I'm sure the world is, probably.
I mean, that's a huge advantage for the railroads. The railroad cars, especially when they're fungible.
Right. You have to have a little special equipment to transfer the waste from the cars.
Yes.
Right. And tip them.
Only a scale difference in trucks.
Right.
Yeah, thank you.
So once you have all these pieces in place, you have your site, you have negotiated your energy contract, you have decided on what's the size of the plant. You spend some time, just like Mark is doing right now with the transfer station, do prepare a conceptual design, do the layout of how the plant would be designed on that site, develop a preliminary grading and drainage plan. And all of this fits into the procurement document. So the end result is that you're trying to put all these pieces together into the procurement document so that the vendor that's responding to it knows they already have a site, they already have an energy contract, they're telling me 1,000 tons, 1,200 tons, whatever that number is, and all those things are laid out. The more specificity that you have in that kind of contract, you go to the next one, I think. Okay. Air permitting. It's also critical. It's probably the most critical path item. Once you identify a site, then you need to do you have to do your air modeling and monitoring. We did talk to ADC. This is the most important permit that this plant potentially would get. Unlike a lot of other communities that I've done this type of permitting, the state's not invested a lot of money in actual monitoring of air around the state. So it's thrown onto the developer or the public entity to do all of that monitoring. So their requirements, the state's requirements, is 4 consecutive quarters of air monitoring on that particular site. And they have to approve your protocol up front, and then you do your 4 quarters. They have to approve the data that you've collected over 4 quarters. So more than likely, it's going to be more than kind of a year. And then you do your modeling. You do your air modeling, which is a prescribed requirements by EPA under the Clean Air Act. And then you predict the emissions from the plant, the technology. You do what they call best available control technology assessment. You look at what is the most recent plant that's been designed and permitted and in operation, and you use that technology, and they probably will ask you to do better than that to advance the industry standards. You also do an analysis on the height of the stack for the facility. That is also modeled. So right now, you could say it's 120 feet. It could be 160 based on the modeling from the facility.
So,
Yeah, please.
why do we care about stack height?
Well, visually, you're going to see, if the modeling says that you need a 200-foot stack, you will see that probably all over Anchorage. If you have another site that you do your modeling and it's 120 feet, visually that's probably a better solution for you. I mean, you probably will do that as part of your siting analysis to see if you pluck down a plant in, say, in Midtown, right as a central transfer station, that might be a higher stack and it might not be applicable to the public.
But what are the benefits? I mean, is a 200-foot stack better because what?
You get more distribution of the emissions from the plant. It's all part of that modeling process.
Okay, jump again, because there's a lot of junk coming out of that. You get it up higher than it moves it better.
Yeah. What do we call it, junk?
Do we have analysis of what that material is that's coming out of the stack?
Yes. Yeah.
It would be helpful to have Mr. Dyson.
Yeah. Pay attention to air traffic. We have the highest percentage of general aviation all over, plus the military base. And I'm sure it depreciates the value of the stack if the helicopter runs into it.
Or 757.
Sure. So, yeah.
So those are the kind of downsides if you really looked at it for certain sites versus others. And that's all part of that siting analysis.
It should be.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Do we know what the tallest stack in Alaska is at this time, or in South Central?
No, I don't. We could probably find that
It
from
would be good to know.
ADC.
It's probably one of the 2 power plants.
I think Chigach's was one.
Yeah.
Anna from MLMP, I don't know the answer to that, but I do know that the newer power plants have less emissions and cooler exhaust, so they're shorter than previous stacks.
Right. Thank you.
There also is local permitting. This is kind of an example of what the solid waste department have to do for the North News transfer station. So it's a conditional use permit, going through a pre-application community meeting application. There's also engagement of the public during this process. But this is about the time that you've already kind of selected your site. We'll at least do some of the preliminary permitting work. but maybe once you select your vendor, they would follow on and do the final permits, the building permits and things of that nature. Okay, procurement package. So all of these elements coalesce into the general procurement package for that, and we talked about there's still be some work of whether or not what kind of model would make sense for Anchorage. It could be design, build, operate, and own. It could be a total privatization process where you're asking a private vendor to put up all the capital for the facility, and you're just basically a customer. It's like leasing a facility. And there are some around the United States where they actually went out in the industry and asked for a private vendor. I don't know whether or not, given our financial condition right now, turn on the stock market reports, I don't know if there's a lot of vendors out there that are willing to invest $350 million, but there probably are, and it may be overseas. I just don't know. So front-end documents, which are pretty much prepared by the procurement department, specifications for the type of facility that you want to build, what kind of amenities that you want. You want to have more kind of a public education facet of the plant. A lot of the facilities we saw had a lot of that stuff built into the plant. Special rooms showing how the plant was actually operating. Those are all kind of like things that you would identify up front. The contracts are really important. Since this is a fairly complex project that's going to last 20 or more years, it'll have a standard design and construction contract, and then usually an operations contract, and it lays out all that. In the document, in the appendices that with the report, it actually has an example of a design, build, and operations contract, just to show you a little bit about what's involved in that. It's pretty complex to put that together. You probably would need some sort of outside legal expertise to actually put together, to lay out all the pluses and minuses of a long-term contract. As one of the assemblymen talked about, it's a complex deal. It really is, because you have to live with that for 20 years or more.
So, if I might, we've now heard this number 20 years a number of times, but I can't fathom we would build a power plant that costs $300 million with a useful life of 20 years. What's the anticipated useful life of the project?
So the Pinellas plant, which is the one that we talked about earlier, went online in 1984. It's still operating. It still has a fairly decent useful life. The county invested another $150 million. And when we were meeting with them, they think that's going to last another 20 or 25 years. So potentially 50 years or more.
Thank you.
I mean, that's pretty much across the industry.
Mr. Lyson?
Yep. As I remember, the plant, the incinerator, is just one, right? Very sophisticated. In other words, aren't individual trains of process that you could expand and just put another train in.
There is.
There is.
So that's one of the issues. If you're designing this thing, let's say 1,200 tons per day, you probably have 3 individual trains.
Okay.
400 tons per day. So a good example is the project that I worked on. We knew that the county was growing significantly, but our board did not want to invest another $100 million in the plant right off. Right? They knew 15 or 20 years out. So we added additional capacity in that plant. We made the tipping floor much bigger. We added another area that another combustion train could be added, and eventually the plant went online in 1986. And 2006, there was another 600 ton per day unit. So they expanded by another 600 tons. They're out of capacity right now. So they have to plan for another plant or expand that plant.
If I may, this is a huge advantage because it does allow you to scale it. We could build the first phase here for what we expect the loads are for the next 10 years and add them. And the more training you have, the more intrinsic reliability you have. Because a failure in one doesn't shut it all down, and you can schedule maintenance, so on and so forth. So that's just a major advantage that any process, critical process, should take care of, or should plan.
Yeah, the extra redundancy in the plant, the extra redundancy in the plant. When we were visiting, I think it was the Hillsborough plant, they have 3 lines, they actually have 4 lines. And so they were taking one of the lines totally down for their 6-month renewal. But the plant still continued to combust garbage. There was no really downtime. They just moved that waste over to the other lines, and they operated at a little higher capacity.
And I assume that the plant itself, whatever it is that wears out, is replaceable.
Yes.
So, and the only thing probably that ends up then in useful life is just technology.
Yeah, well, technology advance.
Yeah, yeah. All right, thank you.
Mrs. France?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you refresh my memory on the operations cost, including ongoing capital maintenance? And then on the issue of scalability, can it also scale down with the potential of reducing some of those maintenance costs, or not maintenance, but operations costs? Scale down in the event that the demand
That we do
goes down.
recycling or something like that.
Right.
So that's something that would have to be part of that analysis that you do up front. Is do that analysis, say, okay, we have 1,000 tons per day or whatever it is, 1,200 tons per day, but we're going to do advanced. We're going to spend a lot more money on enhanced recycling. We're going to go heavily into organics, and so you can make an estimate of how successful those programs are, and then perhaps it's 300 tons. So you downsize the plant from at the very beginning, and maybe add that capacity in the plant to expand in the future. I mean, there's all sorts of options out there, but we're really not at that level yet to do that kind of analysis. But you can.
And then just to follow up, do you know offhand, like just the operations cost, like yearly, for 1,000 tons of garbage?
So when I did the pro forma model, which was phase 1,
Yeah.
we kind of made some estimates and said, well, it's either 1,000 tons or 1,200 tons if you bring in the other boroughs. Interest rates could vary from blank to blank. I think it was like 3% to 5%. Energy rates could vary from 3.5 cents per kilowatt hour to 8 cents per kilowatt hour. I was trying to do the most conservative to the most, well, if everything worked out great. So we came out with like 36 different scenarios in that model. So if you looked at 1,200 tons per day, it was roughly about, I think it was $58 a ton.
Thanks.
Okay, next.
Now the financing. We did meet with the Muni's finance director and the financial advisor and their law counsel, and they prepared a preliminary financing program for this particular project. Roughly $350 to $400 million. Similar to the central transfer station, there would be short-term debt during construction, and then turning over to long-term bonds. Could be 20 years, could be 30 years. I think they predicted 30 years, being a 30-year issue, just to get the rates down. And the debt would be paid by the revenues of the system, pretty much similar to what the transfer station is. You would have a debt service line on them for this particular project.
I think he hit on it. It's Alex Lifka, Chief Fiscal Officer. We walked through this. I think the takeaway you can take is if we were to fully finance this with debt, we got no grants whatsoever, we spent $400 million, that it is financially feasible given the current rate increase structure, which is in their long-term master plan for 21, I think, and 22. I think the trade-offs, which you've heard about already, is if you go forward with this, I think Mark has shared, Spafford has shared some information from Hawaii, that they were able to integrate the biosolid disposal for $20 million, savings of $80 million over having to build it standalone. And I think the other thing to consider is if we go forward with this, then you're probably going to change the structure of how much the central transfer station costs if we decide to do this. So there's lots of opportunities to save money, to work together, but I think at the end of the day, it is affordable and we can pay for it.
So, can you just dive slightly deeper into what you just suggested, that the cost of the central transfer station might be reduced because of this waste to energy project?
So right now you're replacing the tipping floor of the central transfer station, and if you read the report that was generated, there's a tipping floor at this waste to energy. It doesn't really make sense to spend $100 million on a tipping floor here and then spend $400 million for incineration in a tipping floor. It would seem like there would be some ability to combine this.
That is a bit of a problem, right? Because we're proceeding with our central transfer station project now. We have this 1% design. Are we now suggesting that we could do away with the tipping floor at the waste to energy site?
Yeah, because the waste to energy facility is going to have a tipping floor as well, right? And
Exactly.
so if you were to, and this is a big what if, right? If you were to co-locate the waste to energy facility at where the existing transfer station site is, you could save capital costs associated with that because you already have an existing tipping floor there. And so you'd have that infrastructure that's already, and that would go back into the site selection study, right? That would
really
work its way back into that.
predisposes that site in some ways.
From an economic standpoint, right? But there's a whole bunch of other social, are people going to want to live with the fact that it's
$100 million though, right? That's a big number. Okay, that's very interesting to hear that.
And I would say those synergies is what has been driving solid waste to do these studies and bring this information forward to you, because we are sitting at a time period where we have several different synergies that can come together and make a decision to move forward on this much more economic. It happens sooner rather than later.
Mr. Dyson.
Yeah, forgive me, I'm playing catch up here. Any of the plants you worked on use waste heat recovery?
A few.
Yeah, as it is in the oil industry, load, production are always separated by too much distance. And what kind of facilities were you using the heat for in these other ones?
Well, this plant, you think about a boiler, which is surrounded by tubes which have water. That water is heated up by the combustion process. That goes to a turbine generator.
Yes.
And then that turbine generator is generating electricity. If you had an opportunity, and it's probably not here,
yes,
to produce steam.
Yes,
okay,
and heat buildings.
And heat
or
buildings.
processes.
So all of those plants that we saw at the beginning in Sweden, Norway, and all that, that's part of their, I won't say part of their culture, but that's their business model. A lot of those towns or cities, Oslo is a good example, they have a downtown heating loop.
Yep.
Okay, so all that downtown area is all connected to that loop, and that plant is basically a steam generator.
Yeah. So that should be a slight factor when you consider siting. Is there a customer for all that heat?
Right.
Absolutely. I'm with you. I doubt it. Yeah.
I asked it at the beginning, is there opportunities to support?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. And Chris, as usual, you've hit on a really key factor. here we are going off committing, $100 million on other things that might get really changed by this.
And we're
Set.
at 1%.
Pardon?
We're at 1% on project
Yeah,
B.
that's
We're
right.
at probably 60 or more percent on project A. 35% even, like,
Yep.
ooey.
And the other cities around here are in the same process on some level.
Mm-hmm.
That's why getting to a decision point here is really important. Just the very point you raised. Darn it.
Right, and so I think though that for the purposes of the transfer center station, that actually serves a different purpose than the waste to energy site. That is to provide members of the public a place in the center of town where they can go and dispose of waste, as opposed to having to do the 20-mile drive and the commercials as well.
all the commercial.
Right,
Yep.
but I think about it more in the context of my neighbors for whatever reason. And so if we were to go this way, we could come up with a scenario that reduced the tipping floor at the central transfer station and still allowed for some usage of the public if we decided to build out at the landfill this waste to energy, right? We could come up with an alternative that would provide some middle ground.
We'd have to get serious about the fact that we are going to start moving forward with analyzing waste to energy and are serious about it, instead of trying to change something that we're just going to guess about. Does that make sense? We have to make a commitment.
No,
and that's,
I
think
understand that, but that's the conundrum that just raised its ugly head, is that if we do Project A, which is the central transfer station, and we proceed with Project B, and then all of a sudden we've done Plant 1A and Plant 2B, and my God, we don't want to be those people. We want to be better than that. We want to have learned from the past. And so I don't want to say stop with the central transfer station, but we got to figure out an answer to that most fundamental question as soon as we can, because $100 million is $100 million.
Which is why we commissioned the feasibility study, where we think we've provided you with the information and the roadmap to go forward to do this project. So I think what Mark is asking for and what the administration will support is the decision to proceed with some of the tasks involved here, because it informs many decisions that are sitting there waiting to be made. And now is the time to consider what the information you have and find out what more information you need in order to make your decision.
So, for the purposes of our next meeting, which is next week, it would be great to see a timeline, comparative timeline of these two projects next to each other, with critical junctures that we can see as best as you can grab. I know you need a big hat, kind of crystal ball, but do your best, because we have two competing interests now, clearly, and we have to figure out if they can be aligned. So, Mr. Nice.
And for that meeting, I'd like to be refreshed on, if we don't produce the capacity to handle the sludge, what happens? What do we have to do to keep from having to shut down our plant, our wastewater treatment plant? And if I understood that we've got to do something, the do nothing option doesn't work for wastewater treatment. And so we need to know what's the critical point out there. And if we don't do this, what the heck are we going to do? And what's the cost of it?
Right.
You want to answer that, dear Craig?
Sure.
I did answer that earlier when you were gone, but the point is, it's a $100 million decision we're waiting for. And our timing is as soon as today or 5 to 10 years. In other words, we have an existing incinerator that processes our sludge and reduces it to ash to take the line. If that incinerator fails, which is 35 plus years old, we're on the line for future modifications to it, to spend millions more dollars to keep it functional, or replace it. They're spending millions of dollars to keep it functional, and they're spending $100 million to replace it with some sort of other technology, like mass burn or something that's similar. So we got to make that decision soon. That's why, when I said earlier, there's a window of opportunity now. No matter what we do now, we know it's going to be a 5 to 10 year construction process. Those things fully functional in operation, whatever it may be. But if he says no on waste energy, then I'm done. I'm out. I got to figure something else out right now.
right now because you're out of capacity, or you're worried about the failure of the existing plant?
It's a combination of things. A, the additional permitting regulatory requirements to get this thing upgraded and modified. B, it's 35 plus years old, so there's just physical things that need to be rehabilitated to keep it operational.
Some of us old things can't be rehabilitated.
Yeah. This one is kind of what Mark had alluded, or Dr. Rogoff alluded earlier. This technology is our incinerator is a multiple carbon incinerator. That means nothing to you other than it's an archaic Neolithic old system that needs to be replaced.
Yeah.
And if it does fail, there's the components. There's so many components that can fail on this thing: structural, controls, so on and so forth. It gets complicated really fast. The point being is it's outdated. It costs us a huge operational expenses a year. It's not efficient. It can't should be made that way, so it needs to go away.
Yeah, and I think our vulnerability of losing our permit Cook Inlet.
That's on the water side, but that's certainly a component, Fred. Yes. There's incinerators, air permit, our wastewater plants of water permit. That's also another huge expense we're faced potentially with as well. So that's why I would love to have someone else take care of the air permit side and get rid of our waste streams, our solid waste residuals, biosolids.
Yeah, so if we lost our permit, I think it's a federal one, for just doing primary treatment.
Correct.
That would hugely impact.
That's $1 billion cost us.
I'm sorry I asked that question. No. But it makes your point.
I'm very sorry we had the last 15 minutes of this meeting. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I can't read this up here or in the packet, and I'm assuming maybe you've already sent it to us, but does it contain, I know we talked about the cost-benefit analysis and the business case. I mean, does it capture the synergies here?
No.
No, okay.
Nope.
Okay.
We're working on that right now.
Okay. Thanks.
All right, I think that with that, I'm going to say this is the cliffhanger episode, and we'll be back for episode 2 next week if there's no last questions. Remember? Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, I just was wondering if we could extend to do the virtual reality.
I don't think we need to do that as a meeting.
No.
I think that if you want to stick around, that's at your pleasure. And since this is a committee, I guess we will allow for public comment. Would anyone like to speak? Mr. Haberman.
My name is Eugene Haberman. I'm Alaska resident for over 42 years, resident of Anchorage for 20 years, and currently resident of Valley. I follow the public process, and the public process goes appropriately. Decision made by the governing body, more like the public interest. Task 11, financing. I appreciate Assembly Member LaFrance pointing out that sheet here with the numbers. The public needs to see that. You need to see the numbers. What does that sheet say? You can't read it. If you want financing, where's the transparency in that? And that's critical on the issue of whether it's going to be approved or not, and the public's going to be supporting on that point. Thank you to Assembly Member LaFrance for pointing that out. Second is, we continue to have these meetings where I know it's, of course, the hero here, I'm glad to see him here, but he got put in that there's a subject that he's interested in, and I'm glad he's here. But again, I remind you, over the years, the agenda is put on, not on the website, but on that table at the beginning of the meeting. So the people are clueless. Now, there's more than just Butch who should be know about this thing. The public should, people in the borough on discussion. And frequently there was reference to the Matsu Borough. But how does the Matsu Borough know about this scenario? We're blinded. And all due respect, I like these words to go back to the borough, is I'm glad the Borough Assembly, when they have their meetings, they're public, and there's materials that are on that the public can see way in advance, packets, agendas, and all that. But meeting after meeting, and also we're moving into, we are in a world health crisis. I plead with you to get out of these rooms. Have them at the LUSAC library. Video, audio, because these discussions you're doing, and also discussions on the coronavirus, on occasion, more frequently now, the public's not hearing that conversation, and they've been separated, and that creates more fear with the unknown. That ends my comment. Thank you very much.
Anyone else wish to be heard? Seeing none, any members' comments? I would just note for the public and anyone listening that the mayor has called a conference at 2:30 p.m. in which he'll be addressing the COVID-19 epidemic, and in all likelihood will be making a declaration. And so stay tuned for more information coming from the municipality. With that, we're adjourned.